You are now listening to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. We preserve the history and sport of hunting through curious conversation and action-packed hunts, as well as offering you tips and strategy for more successful hunts. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. This is episode number 160. I'm joined by Trent from Chest Thumper Outdoors. How's it going, man? Are you on the side of the highway doing the podcast?
Good. Yeah. So I'm pulled over in front of an old gas station. I'm headed to Utah.
And why?
So I'm about
why are you
3/4 of the way
headed to
through
Utah?
Kansas. So I do all the photography, videography, marketing, and social media for something called Mountain Archery Fest. It's a lifestyle shoot, kind of in the same vein as TAC. It's more family oriented though. You know, Brandon is the CEO of the company. He really wants to build something that the whole family can come and enjoy the weekend, even if the family's not necessarily into archery. So there's kind of an emphasis on the courses are fun to just hike, and there's cool scenery on the courses as well. So even if, you know, mom and kiddo wants to hike along with dad while dad shoots, or, you know, dad and kiddo want to hike along with mom while mom shoots or whatever, there's still kind of stuff to do. You know, we put some vendors together, usually have food trucks, try to keep it interesting.
That's fun because I feel like every year that I go to TAC, I realize how small and how big the archery community is. I see a ton of people that I know, and it always encourages me. Do you get pretty encouraged when you're out doing the mountain archery stuff?
Yeah, man. I mean, what's been amazing for me, this is my first year with them, and I've been to Georgia, Pennsylvania, Utah once already, in Colorado with these guys. And it's like every time I go somewhere, I meet new people, but it's like we've known each other forever. And it makes me feel a lot less, I guess, overall negative about the community. Because, you know, if you look at social media, there's always those guys that are like, it's over commercialized and it's this and that and the other. And when you do the kind of stuff we do, sometimes it's easy to get pounded with that just over and over and over again. So I go and meet these guys that are just like me, just like you, that just love to shoot a bow, love to hunt. And it's so refreshing. I mean, it's like, I don't even know the best words to describe it, man. It's a good feeling to know that there's just the average Joe, the average guy like us out there that just loves what we're doing.
Yeah, it's easy to get people the wrong way too on social media. I was watching a working class bow hunter podcast the other day with they titled it "The Most Hated Hunter on TikTok." It's with a guy, it's Iowa whitetail guy, and
yeah, so I love him.
yeah. I saw him on the podcast. And I was like, this guy's a really nice dude. He's a really normal.
Yeah, so
nice guy.
I kind of interacted with him a few times on TikTok. And not in a negative connotation, unlike most people. Like, we've had some positive interactions just in comments and stuff like that. And he's very much not the type of guy he kind of portrays himself as on TikTok. I watched that same podcast, and he mentions in there, he just gives back the energy that he gets. You know, on one level, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You know, I've got some snippy TikToks myself where it's just kind of like, sometimes they just kind of push you over the edge a little bit. You got to snap back a little bit, but I'm not quite as extreme as he is.
Yeah, some people got the personality for it, and some people don't. I'm not that bold, but anyway. So, have you had a good spring or summer, or what are you up to as far as hunting this fall before we jump into some of the broadhead stuff we want to talk about?
So I went to. May was a very busy month for me. So I was in Pennsylvania with Mountain Archery Fest at the beginning of May. And I got home and was home for 3 days. And then I left and went to Montana on a black bear hunt. And then I was home for a day, and then I left again for Utah the first time. So my spring has been awesome. I did have a successful black bear hunt. I went on a guided hunt with a guide that is kind of a client with mine. I'm working with him, helping him on some marketing stuff. And it was a freaking amazing experience. My first time hunting out west, and in Montana, of all places. I feel unbelievably blessed for that to be the case. So that's kind of been my hunting in the spring. I didn't draw a turkey tag. So in Illinois, you have to draw turkey tags, and it's weird seasons. I didn't draw a turkey tag. And I'm not honestly a huge turkey hunter anyways. It's not really my thing. It's okay. More than anything, it's fun to hang out with my buddies while we do that. But and then everything else has just been this rotation of gone for a week for Mountain Archery Fest, home for 6 days, gone for a week. So I've not had a ton of downtime. Usually when I'm home, I'm building arrows or setting up bows to ship out, or building my own stuff, or editing video and pictures and stuff like that for Mountain Archery Fest. So
Mm,
my own personal social medias have slacked a lot.
yeah.
Uh, but I've been loving every single minute of it.
How was the I just got back from Canada for a black bear hunt, drove through Montana, and I was so encouraged because I realized I live in a very populated place in Central Texas, and I realized, you know what? If everything does go to crap, there's still land for us to expand into. So, how was your black bear hunt? Did you do bow? Did you rifle? You said you went
it
outfitted.
was
I did as well.
it was Bo. And it was cool. So the guy that I went with, he's a third generation guide. His name is Michael Ritchie. He's got a guide service called Steel Creek Outfitters, and he's a really, really salt of the earth dude. It was actually my first time ever meeting him, and me and a buddy drove out. A really cool situation. I got to take a buddy whose dream hunt was black bear on that
Mhm.
hunt. His first Western hunt also. He's only been bow hunting for 6 years. And I got to take him out, and we got to do this hunt together. So watching that was cool, but the stark contrast between like Illinois, where I'm from, and Montana, whole completely different world. And we did bears with dogs,
Oh,
which
okay.
before that hunt, I I didn't necessarily dislike the idea of hound hunting. It just wasn't ever anything that really interested me.
Mhm.
But this is this guy's passion. So he told us, he goes, we can try to spot and stalk, but where we're at's really thick, and I just don't know if it's going to work. And he wasn't kidding. He's got a huge area to work with, and of that huge area, he's probably got 300 acres that is actually glassable. Everything else is just thick timber, which 300 acres to us sounds like a lot, but when you consider his guide area is probably 40,000 acres,
Yeah.
like that's nothing. But we went out and we did the dog thing, and I honestly don't know that I want to bear hunt any other way now.
Really?
But dude, when you're driving along, so they put the dogs in the box and then they put one up on top of the box, and that dog is smelling for a bear. And when they hit the track, they go berserk. And I'm a big upland game hunter. Like, I love watching the dogs work and do their thing anyways, duck dogs. There's something about that that's almost mesmerizing to me. So to watch
Mhm.
these dogs, which is like that on steroids, is unbelievable. When you're driving along and you're just BSing and having a good time and that dog goes nuts, you jump out of the truck and he unhooks that dog and it jumps off a freaking cliff and down into the woods barking. And then he lets the, oh man, talk about freaking adrenaline. Totally would have never understood until I went out there and experienced it. And after experiencing it, I don't know that black bear hunting any other way would be as exciting.
Man, that does sound a lot more exciting than what we did. We just shot them over bait, but with dogs sounds so you guys were just driving and you'd cut a track off the road and or with the
Yeah.
dogs just really. That's so fun.
Yeah. So basically, and that was the other cool thing about it, right? Shooting them over bait, you go out, you set in a tree stand. It's similar to whitetail hunting.
Yeah.
Same principle, you set and you wait. For us, it almost reminded me of kind of duck hunting. I don't know if you've done much waterfowl or
Oh yeah.
not, but you sit in the blind, you BS with the buddies, and then when the ducks come in, you get down, you be quiet. Well, it's similar here. We drove around, we BS, we laughed, we ate snacks, we had a good time. But the minute that dog cut a track, got that scent and started going nuts, it was game on, and it was go time, dude. And you get to see so much beautiful country doing that, because we're taking 2 tracks up mountains and kicking into 4-wheel drive. And at one point, he had to lower the pressure in his tires to get through this, it's like 2.5 foot deep snowbank. And I mean, so it's a whole adventure, dude. We were cutting up trees and throwing them off the trail. And to me, I'm a big adventure guy. Like, hunting for me is all about the adventure. I'm terrible
Yeah.
about even home. I'm terrible about, all right, walking with the buddies and they get set up in their trees. And I'm like, I'm going to go just, 300 yards this way and set up. And then I get back there and it's like, what's over that hill? What's over that hill? And next thing I know, it's got 40 minutes of shooting light left. I'm like, I need to be in a tree somewhere. This is bad.
Yeah.
So that type of hunting where you're driving around and doing the adventure and exploring was just unbelievable for me.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to the way they hunt mountain lions, like out west, right? Too with the dogs. It's the exact same thing.
It's the exact same thing. The one difference. So this guy also is big into mountain lions. He cut his teeth with his dad in Idaho, where they've been able to chase black bears with hounds for a long time, and then also cats. So that's kind of where he learned and where his dogs got trained up. And Montana just got hounds last year, and so it's fairly fresh in Montana. But the cats have been like that for a long time. And he told me the only big difference is with a cat, you're kind of going along on snow machines or snowmobiles, whatever you want to call them, and you'll find fresh tracks because it's usually thick snow and you can kind of tell what's going on. With a bear, a lot of times you're not seeing a track. Like most of the times when those dogs were going crazy, we weren't seeing tracks at all. There was no indication there was a bear there. The dogs could just smell it.
Wow.
So it's kind of a whole other level of excitement because you just don't know. Another cool thing is he kind of explained the difference between a cat and a bear. And he said with a cat, generally speaking, if he cuts a track, he feels confident he can tree that cat, whether it's that day or the next day. With a bear, you just don't know. So, for example, my buddy's bear that he shot, the dogs went probably 11 miles chasing that bear before they treed it.
Wow.
So those dogs are going insane. With my bear, it wasn't, I bet it was 5. The dogs did, so it's just a whole different world. And then I guess bears are way less predictable once they're in the tree. And this guy, like I said, he's in love with it. So he was explaining all the intricacies. Another thing, it's cool to see somebody that loves and so passionate about something talk about it, So yeah, I would highly recommend if you've ever black bear hunted and you want to experience a whole new world, find somebody that does it with hounds and go, because it's crazy.
That's super cool. We're actually having him on the podcast Thursday, which is exciting.
You guys did get a hold of him then?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, it took a while. He said he wasn't on Instagram very much. He shot me his cell phone number. I was like, no problem. So we got an episode.
Yeah, he's not a big social media guy or anything like that. And I'll tell you what, the dude works his ass off. On top of being a guide, I think he told me he works for another guide outfit and he does some other stuff on the side. He's a working fool, dude. Just like I said, salt of the earth, good dude that really wants to make a living doing what he loves, kind of like what we all want to do, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So you end up shooting one. How close do you get to it? Do you have to have an angle like compensation when you're shooting up into a tree or what?
Yeah. So I shot mine 5 hours into the first day.
Oh, that's awesome.
And one thing, it was great, except I live at 700 feet and I shot my black bear at 7,000 feet and I'm already not in good shape. So it about killed me. But when you're up at the tree, my shot was 13 yards, my first shot. I had to shoot the bear 5 times. I'm telling on myself. So, so my shot was 13 yards upwards and it's a whole different world. We're used to shooting out of trees down. When you shoot up, the whole hinge at the hips thing is still like there, and you got your shot process in your head, but it's still way, way different. I shot that bear at a more drastic upward angle than I've ever shot anything at a downward angle ever. And I've shot deer at 25 foot up in a tree. Mm-hmm. So way different world there. And then I had to shoot it 5 times. I studied a ton of bear anatomy before I went out there to get the idea of where I really needed to put the arrow. And then this bear's up in the tree and it just looks like a black blob of fur.
Yes,
and there's
that's exactly what they look like.
Yeah, dude. Well, there's instances where I couldn't tell where its head was or its ass was. And it's like, where do I shoot this thing? I don't want to shoot it in the butt. Mm-hmm. So there's times I'm looking and trying to find where the head is and the nose will poke up okay, so it's pointed this way, but it was so hard for me to try to get any kind of reference point. On a deer, you've got the crease. You can't see a crease in a black bear. I couldn't see it in the tree. It was the way it was sitting. So I shot low the first time. And Michael, the guide, had told us stories about bears getting shot and then not dying and running out of the tree and running for another 2 miles before they're treed again. And I was already half dead from getting to the bear in the tree. So there was no way I was chasing it 2 more miles. Mm-hmm. So I shot the first time and I kind of stood there in awe. And Michael says, shoot it again. So I pulled an arrow. Well, after he said it once, I emptied my quiver, dude. I shot the bear 5 times, crawled up in the tree and died after that. But it was, it was one of those cases where once I realized that I need to keep shooting until it was done, I didn't stop until my quiver was empty. So
Well, with
I
whitetail and stuff, you watch them run off, and you don't see any of that death a lot of the time. And when you're the animal is stagnant, it's like, okay, it's not even if you double lung it, it's not just gonna die in 10 seconds. It's not gonna be over.
yeah, yeah, dude. And that, I'll tell you what, that's the other thing that's kind of interesting about that. Like you just said, you shoot a whitetail, runs off and dies. 99% of the time, we don't get to see the tail end of that. You know, when that animal's up in the tree, for lack of a better term, with trapped with nowhere to go. I mean, you see it all, so it's a different feeling. Straight up, I shot that bear. It fell out of the tree. I just collapsed to my knees, and like I had a moment of like, I don't know, self reflection
Mhm.
is maybe the best way to put it, because it is. I mean, that's real, you know, and it is death. You're taking a life. That's a serious thing. But at the same time, you know, I worked hard for that, and I'm
Yeah.
excited, and it's hard not to be happy in the moment. But I felt, you know, there's some remorse there too.
Yeah, it's like a yin and a yang. I always tell my wife, she's like, you celebrate, but then there's always this, there's a sigh of relief, and it's like, it's happy, it's a little bit of sadness, it's kind of all of it together, and that's kind of part of it if you're gonna kill things.
Yeah, man, and I think, you know, one thing I think a lot of young hunters especially miss is that end of it, right? Because most people cut their teeth whitetail hunting and they run off and die. They don't see the end,
Hmm.
and I think getting to experience that is a very very powerful thing that every hunter should go through at some point.
Yeah, 100%. We had a similar situation on one of the bears that we shot. I shot mine, and thankfully, it was easy. It worked out perfectly. It does not always work out that way, but my buddies was a similar situation. I had to shoot it a few times, and just watching it, it's like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with this, but it's part of it. We brought it upon ourselves. We chose to do this. And I always tell people I've shot a deer one time. I shot a deer 4 times, and people were like, why? And I said, it was still alive. What do you want me
Yeah,
to do? Say, oh, I don't want to break another $20 arrow. I don't care. At this point,
yeah,
I'm trying to kill this animal as fast as I can.
exactly. Well, and I'm one of those guys that like I'll watch YouTube videos constantly or have them playing in the background while I'm working. And if I happen to glance up when a guy shoots a deer, because I'm also very much the guy that rewinds to see the shot, you
Mhm.
know, and like everybody else, oh, that was a bad shot or that was a great shot. If you're the guy that spines a deer and then turns around and celebrates to the camera, I guarantee you I will never watch anything you ever put on YouTube ever again. Because I am so much, you need to put a follow up shot on that deer if it's possible, if it didn't fall down behind a tree, you need to put a follow up shot and finish that animal's life as quickly as possible. So it frustrates me. And I get it. I get it. It's an exciting moment, especially if those guys that have been chasing this particular buck for, you know, 5 years or 4 years, they have all this history. But man, there's gotta be there's gotta be more value in that animal's life than to just immediately celebrate when it's still on the ground
Mhm.
struggling. And what's frustrating even more is when they're just filming it struggling. There's people on YouTube that I specifically watch now. Like I've subscribed and like I specifically watch their content because I happened upon one of their videos and they spined a doe and then they put an extra arrow in her to finish her off. And then they have this moment where they turn to the camera and they're like, you know, it's not ideal, but you know, I'm excited. I did what I had to do. It's not ideal. I'm like, well, you have a fan for life now because I have nothing but respect for that.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. That's a good way to put it. Let's hard pivot. Let's talk
Yeah.
something that I think is really applicable and very timely, especially as season is getting here sooner and sooner. I keep looking down. I'm like 6. What? It's fixing to be 7 July. It's fixing to be deer season, as is what I know. And
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
very very
Um,
quickly. So there's a lot of polarizing information out there, not only just in the bow hunting community, but specifically if you really want to get people fired up, start to talk about broadheads. Start to talk about fixed versus expandable. Why do you think all that exists?
uh,
All the
because
animosity.
man, I think it's multifold. One part of it is I think humans are just naturally like tribal, so like one side or the other. I think that's just normal for people in general. Much you know, on any topic. I think a lot of it is social media gives voices to everyone, even some people that shouldn't have voices. I also think It's reality, man. And that's not to
It
say that
is.
I should always have a voice, you know, like I'm sure there's some people that listen to stuff I say and are like, Jesus, this guy is ridiculous. But I think a lot of it just boils down to people like to argue about things too, right? Like I'm guilty on TikTok. Like if my views get low or I get a little bored, well, it's time to put a post up that's like, oh, Matthews aren't great because there's another polarizing topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think it's a little bit of everything, but I think people go about it completely the wrong way in general. Just I think there's ways to really educate people. I don't think it needs to be a polarizing topic, and I think the kind of the middle section or segment is where everybody needs to like sit, right? Because everybody's setup is different. Like you shoot something different than I shoot, than Jeff and Joe and Jim and Jack all shoot, and we're not all going to have the perfect broadhead is going to be the same. And there's just a lot of polarizing viewpoints. I think views. There's another thing, man. Like we're in a social media world, right? So if you have a polarizing topic and you can get views, you're going to push one side or the other. I've taken some classes on growing a social media following, and they actually some of them recommend pick a polarizing topic and take a side strongly. So I
Interesting.
think it's a little, yeah, I think it's a little everything.
Hmm. So you do a lot of broadhead testing on TikTok, and you have some actually really popular videos, and they're very interesting, very concise, but also you implement a lot of tests in them when you're doing them. What have you learned about fixed and expandables and all types of broadheads through your testing? Do they all work? Is there bad ones? Is there good ones? What do you think?
There's definitely bad and good. Like that is a real thing, right? But it's not a major brand thing. So when you get into cheaper broadheads, when you get into knockoff broadheads, when you get into just chintzier quality stuff, that's when you get a bad broadhead. But to say, just for example, a Muzzy is a bad broadhead versus a NAP Thunderhead, that's not true. They're both great broadheads. The biggest thing I've learned and was a really big eye opener for me is every broadhead is a great broadhead if it's put where it's supposed to be. Just some are better than others.
Mhm.
And I think that's where people need to sit on it and understand that is the case. Like just because you may shoot a mech and I shoot a fix doesn't mean yours is better than mine or vice versa. Both great as long as they go where they need to. Um, it's just one of those things that I kind of wanted it to be more polarizing. Like I kind of wanted to be like, because I'm predominantly a fixed blade guy. Like I'll shoot mechs, but it's very situational. So I kind of wanted all my tests to reveal that fixed blades are just the end all be all, and like I'm right. And
Mhm.
that's not the case. It's just not the case. It's not real.
Yeah, I've over the last I'm trying to think how many years I've been bow hunting. Gosh, it's got to be 12, 13 years, something like that. I could I could list them out right now. I've shot Swacker, shot Muzzy, shot Rage, shot NAP. I've shot oh gosh, I've shot 8 to 10 probably different broadheads, and I've killed deer with each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
They all work. They really do if you put them in the right place. But
Yeah,
gosh, I have a preference. I have a
sure,
preference based on my own experience too, though.
sure. Well, and that's the thing. It's a preference, right? Like that goes back to that everybody kind of needing to understand that everybody's setups are different. You know, I get a ton of questions because I do all that broadhead testing. Like, what's the best broadhead? Or like, what's the best broadhead for me? Or, you know, if you could only pick one broadhead, which would you pick? It's like I can't answer any of those. I don't believe there's a such thing as the best broadhead. The best broadhead for you depends heavily on your setup and what you're trying to shoot and the distances you're trying to shoot. And if I could only pick one broadhead, I can't because I'm the type of guy that has 6 different broadheads in his quiver when I go in the woods. So
Mhm.
I need to go somewhere where I could kill hogs year round with them because I just don't get to test them enough.
Yeah.
But I just like the whole does it shoot like a field point? I've tested on video, I think 60 different broadheads at this point. I've probably tested well over 100 just in my own messings around because I was testing broadheads way before I was ever videoing any of it. And of all of those broadheads, I've maybe found 4 or 5 that don't shoot with my field points, provided my bow's tuned. So when people ask, does it shoot like a field point? my answer is always, yeah, if your bow's tuned. And I've gotten a lot of flack about that. Well, that's what I found to be the case in all these broadheads I've shot. I can't tell you anything that I don't know to be true.
Yeah, I have the biggest argument I've heard for folks that don't want to shoot a fixed. I shoot a fixed now. Probably the last 10 animals that I've shot with been with a fixed is I want something that I take it out of the box and it shoots exactly like my field points. And they're not tuning their bow. They're not doing anything like that. It's I don't want to have to deal with anything extracurricular when it comes to my broadheads. To which I say, you're trying to kill a wild animal. It shouldn't be how much effort does this take for me to get it right. It should be I'll do whatever I need to do to get it right instead of I want the least amount of effort put in for the greatest of results.
It 100% should be how you said, but that's just not the reality of the world we live in. It's not.
No.
So my argument to those guys is it doesn't take very long to tune a bow. I mean, as long as the bow wants to cooperate, because I've had some that don't, as long as the bow wants to cooperate, you can tune a bow in 10 to 15 minutes. As long as you are competent enough in your shooting ability and, like I said, the bow wants to cooperate, it doesn't take very long. It really doesn't. On the back end of that, even if you're shooting a mechanical broadhead, you're going to see gains in performance and penetration and accuracy and everything out of having a properly tuned bow. So to me, there's no good excuse not to tune your bow. And if you don't feel comfortable doing it, I guarantee you can get online and find somebody who does that's local to you, or you can find a shop. And even if you have to drive 2 hours to go to a good shop, it's worth that 2-hour drive because maybe you can ask them some questions and watch how they do it and learn and just do it yourself from then on out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you kind of hit the nail on the head. You're shooting a wild animal. It shouldn't be how little work can I do to get the most result. It should be I need to do as much work as possible to get the best result.
So for folks that hear that jargon, sometimes they tune bow, paper tuning, barrel shaft tuning. What does it even mean to have a bow properly tuned? Is it an alignment issue? Is it a timing issue? What all goes into it? The Hunter's Advantage podcast is powered by Out on a Limb Manufacturing. Out on a Limb is a family-owned company based right here in Oklahoma that makes tree stands, saddle platforms, climbing sticks, and so much more.
Christian, I have a quick question.
What's that?
What bites down harder, a hippo or an alligator?
No idea.
It's a trick question. The Ridge Runner 2.0 bites harder than both of them. But all jokes aside, we use these products all across the land on public or private. These help us get into any tree we want and hunt where the deer actually are.
Most men go to the grocery store for their meat, but these products help you go to God's grocery store. I have used the Out on a Limb Ridge Runner 2.0 and the Shakar sticks for the last few years hunting public land bucks, and I've actually shot several bucks out of this setup. If you want to support the podcast and get some Out on a Limb equipment, make sure to go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 for 10% off at checkout. Once again, if you want to support the podcast, go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 at checkout for 10% off. Now let's get back to the podcast.
All of the above. So essentially, the way I kind of look at it is a bow is a machine. And when the machine is, let's equate it to a car, right? If you change your oil on your car and keep up on maintenance, it's going to run better, right? Same principle with a bow. Keep your strings changed, make sure your cams are in time, make sure your center shot's set, make sure the machine is as perfect as possible. And then the only thing that can make mistakes is you, and you've done your job. And that's basically what tuning a bow is. And that is a lot of jargon too, because I've heard that. I try to aim a lot of my content towards like beginners and making it not so daunting. Mm-hmm. And I do get a lot of like, what is paper tuning? Well, paper tuning is just checking the way the arrow comes out of the bow. The most basic way to say it. And there's a lot of great resources online. If you Google how to paper tune, where it will give you charts that show you what you need to do depending on the paper tear you get. And to me, that's the starting point. You start there and then you take your bow outside and you go to 20 yards and one field point and one fixed blade broadhead. And I do it with the biggest, nastiest fixed blade that I can possibly find in my grain weight. You shoot your broadhead first and your field point second. And if they're touching, or they're within your shooting ability, because you need to be cognizant of what you're capable of. Hopefully at 20 yards, that's arrows touching. Then it's good to go. Check it at 30, check it at 40, check it to your max shooting range, right? Because the other reality of this is the vast majority of guys are not bombing 100-yard shots at deer, right? Mm-hmm. especially in the Midwest, most guys are shooting 40 and less. So if you can make your field points and your broadheads in the same group at 40 yards, we'll say a 3-inch group at 40 yards, you're good to go. Just make sure you're not getting any super crazy weird arrow flight, and you can see that with your eye no matter how fast your bow shoots. If your arrow's coming out like this or way high or weird, you can see it. As long as you're not getting any crazy arrow flight and those, they're all grouping together, to me, you're tuned. You're ready to go. I don't get into the weeds a lot because I used to, and it almost ruined archery for me.
What part of it almost ruined archery for you? Just too much information?
Yeah, basically it was like no matter what I did, it was never good enough. So it was like I would paper tune, then I would bare shaft paper tune, then I'd go outside and bare shaft tune, then I would broadhead tune, then I'd French tune, and all these different tuning methods all at once. And it just, every time I do something a little different, it could be that I was just a little fatigued, my grip was a little off. Oh, I need to adjust a 16th of an inch this way or that way or the other way. And it was just, I was fiddling so much that it became not about hunting at all and more about messing with equipment. And that almost ruined hunting for me because every time I went in the woods, it was always like, man, maybe it's a 16th off. Like maybe it's this or that or the other. Or maybe I need to do something a hair different. And I was too much in my own head. And I see that a lot too with new people getting into it, right? They'll get on YouTube and they'll see French tuning and they'll see walk back tuning and broadhead tuning and bare shaft tuning. And then they try to do all this stuff and they're like, I don't know what's going on. My arrow's basically hitting the target sideways. So yeah. I try to keep it as simple as possible. Shoot it through paper, get your bullet hole, go outside, shoot a broadhead and a field point together at your max hunting distance, as long as they are within your capability of shooting. And I think that's something else a lot of people need to recognize is what the real capability of shooting is and be honest with themselves. You're good to go. As long as you're not getting any obscenely crazy flight, they're within your capability of shooting, go hunt. Because if not, you're going to ruin it.
Yeah, I like having all my stuff in line and in alignment and taken care of before the season, because to me, that's like, okay, I can take the equipment out of the equation, and now whatever is wrong, I can say that's on me. That's oh, bad shot. Oh, well, I think I saw my arrow kick a little bit when it was going. It's like, come on, that wasn't there.
Yeah.
That was you.
Yep. Well, yeah. And that's the other end of it too, right? So when somebody brings me their bow to tune, I don't like to let them leave unless I know everything's perfect, because I've had instances where guys are coming back in later in season and putting their bow down on the table just frustrated. This bow made me miss the biggest buck of my life.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. And I get it. If you miss the biggest buck of your life, of course you're frustrated. It's one of the most heartbreaking things. It might be worse than childbirth. It's but there's just a lot of times it's almost always us. The machine is perfect. Even an imperfect bow is more perfect than we are. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. I know a lot of folks too that are just now getting into archery and they get down the rabbit hole of diving too deep into the details, like the tuning. They're like, oh, well, I need to get my perfect arrow weight and my perfect broadhead and my perfect FOC before I go this next season. I'm like, yeah, but you haven't shot a deer yet. You're worrying about too much of the details before enjoying. Like, this is fun. If you get too far into that, it takes a lot of the fun away.
Yeah, so to kind of tie it back into broadheads, and we'll talk arrow building a little bit too, is I think that's the biggest downside of the heavy FOC, heavy broadhead, like heavy arrow movement, right? Is it's a lot of information. And for the most part, it seems to me that for the most part, the people chasing this information have no right to be doing so. They need to focus on woodsmanship and figuring out how to kill deer and find deer or whatever animal they may be hunting before they ever focus on building a heavy arrow with a 200 grain broadhead up front with 30% FOC. Like, that is so down the line from what you need to be focusing on. And that doesn't come from a place of hate at all. That comes from a place of honestly love. Like, I want you to be as successful as possible every time you step in the woods. And especially starting out, I think it's just one more thing that's kind of clouding the overall goal of what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, when you first start shooting, you're not going to be you're probably not going to be a great shot. So there's not stuff to tinker with in the beginning, anyways. Like you're still trying to figure out your form and how to shoot a bow and how to properly execute a release. And you're trying to optimize all these things before you're becoming baseline efficient. And it's like, you can't do that. I can't learn the breaststroke if I don't know how to swim regular first. They're not going to go and be like, go ahead, show me it. Show me the butterfly. It's not going to happen.
Right. Yeah, that's a perfect analogy, man. I mean, I'm fortunate. The friend I took out with me, I taught him to hunt basically from bare bones. He'd never really picked up a bow or anything before. So I taught him to shoot, taught him to hunt. And when it comes to like archery, he's just kind of like, yeah, what do you think? And I'm just like, I think you just need to go out and focus on hunting. So I build him a basic arrow setup, nothing crazy. And he goes out and he kills stuff. He's been hunting 6 years. He's killed 8 animals. I mean, he's been super successful. And now it's getting to the point where if he wanted to tinker, I'd be like, all right, let's start tinkering. But he's like, no, dude, just whatever you say works. And I think that's like where people need to be though, right? Spend that time when you're starting, just getting the experience and shooting animals, enjoying it, learning to love it if you don't love it, or finding out that you don't love it. So then you're not spending all this time doing stuff and spending money that you don't need to be spending. And then you can start tinkering. About 3 years ago, I went down that heavy arrow, high FOC, like rabbit hole. And I mean, I jumped in deep, 200 grain broadhead. I was shooting a 556 grain arrow with 23.4% FOC, 320 grains up front. Like I went down the rabbit hole, feathers in the back, no wraps, as light as possible. And I killed deer and I had a great experience with it. And you know what? Done the same thing with 450 grain arrow with 11% FOC. Through the animal and in the dirt is through the animal and in the dirt, whether it's 6 inches or 2 feet.
Yeah, you could have killed a Toyota Prius with that first arrow you're talking about.
Yeah, man. I mean, I shot it through some gnarly, nasty stuff. Heck, a lot of my broadhead tests were done with arrows of that vein. I've done it. I don't see the difference. I think a lot of modern equipment has eliminated the necessity for that level of insanity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of goes back to the whole broadhead thing, and I think people need to understand everybody's setup's a little different. Same way with arrow building and your total setup, right? Like maybe you're the 650 grain arrow guy with heavyweight up front, cool, but it's not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the overarching theme of a lot of what I do now is to tell people that like kind of whatever you're comfortable with works, man. Just make sure you are doing your part and putting it where it belongs. For being so polarizing in one direction or the other with arrow builds and broadhead selection, I'm very much the middle of the road guy. Like I don't see the need to be polarizing in either direction. I will caveat that by saying when you have a setup that is in either direction. So for example, if you are somebody that's shooting 23-inch draw with 40 pounds, you need to be a little more cognizant about what you're doing. Or if you're a guy that's shooting 32 inches at 80 pounds, you have a lot more freedom than basically anybody else. So there's extremes, but for the most of us in that middle road, not a whole lot of bad options out there.
So if let's say this is my second season bow hunting, I'm trying to figure out a broadhead selection, and I walked in and I started talking to Trent. How would you lead me, or what would be your decision-making process on what broadhead is right for me? Obviously, there's going to be a dozen that are right for me, but how are you going to maybe cut off and eliminate the ones on the fringes?
Well, the first thing I'm going to ask you is what's your draw length and what's your poundage? If you don't know that, I'm going to find it out. So I'll take your bow, I'll measure your draw length, I'll take your bow, I'll measure it on a scale, and we'll say you're a 28-inch, 70-pound guy. Like that seems to be relatively common. And then I'm going to look at your arrow setup. Are you shooting something really lightweight? Or are you shooting something really heavy? We'll say you're shooting a 450 grain arrow. That's kind of run of the mill, I think, right in the middle-ish, maybe a little on the heavy side for some guys. At that point, it's kind of like a fixed blade. A fixed blade is going to be a good choice no matter what. And some fixed blades I like just off the top of my head: Muzzy Trocar, Magnus Black Hornet, Magnus Buzzcut. Radical Archery Designs, which is not a very well-known company, but man, they make some really, really good broadheads. They make something called a Rival. They make a Madman. Even an old school like Muzzy, like a Muzzy MX3 or NAP Thunderhead. Those are all great options. Slick Tricks. I mean, there's a billion good options, right? So basically, I would tell you any fixed blade that you think looks cool would be a pretty good option. And that's what I tell a lot of people, right? Because whether we want to admit it or not, there is a lot of people that care a lot about aesthetics. I build a lot of custom arrows and weird colors just because they like the aesthetics, right? So my answer to those guys is if you want to shoot a fixed blade, pick something that looks cool and shoot it because you're good. Like, just don't pick up an Allen and don't go on Amazon and buy a knockoff Montec or anything like that. But pick up a fixed blade and shoot it. As long as you think it looks cool, it's probably going to work. You're good to go. Now, when it comes to mechanicals, I'm going to ask you more questions like, what do you think your average shot distance is going to be? So if you're shooting 20 yards, I don't see why you couldn't shoot like a Ridge Tripan or like a Grim Reaper Whitetail Special or like a Sever 2 2.0, a big cut mechanical. You can get away with it, especially at 2870 with a relatively heavy arrow, no problem. So even out to 30 yards, heck, even out to 40, you could probably get away with it. When you start stretching it past 40, things get a little shaky. I tend to try to direct people to 2 holes versus 1 hole. So even out at 40, things can be a little weird. If you want something a little bit more, I guess, friendly, then I start looking at like the Sever 1.5 or the Grim Reaper 1 3/8 inch cut or a 1.5 inch. Swacker makes a really nice all steel 1.5 inch broadhead. So something with a little smaller cut, if you for some reason really like the mechanical, I think is going to be a great option. So I think for most average guys, right, the 28 inch, 70 pound, 450, there's a lot of broadhead options. Those guys hit there's not really a bad option as long as you know what you're capable of type of guy. Now, if you're out west and you're shooting elk, I'm going to tell you not to shoot a mechanical at all.
Mm-hmm.
I know guys that do it. I know guys that kill elk every year with mechanicals. There's no way I am trusting a mechanical broadhead with an elk, period. I'm not going to do it. I would never recommend it to anybody. It's been done. I'll never tell you to do that. If you're a guy that's shooting, 60, 70, 80 yards at whitetail for some reason, you're capable of that, I'm going to tell you to shoot a fixed blade because now we're talking about penetration issues at those distances with mechanicals. I think a fixed blade is going to be a better choice. So it's all situational and it's all, truly situational, whether it's setup based, whether it's distance based, even animals you're hunting, right? If you're a guy in Arizona hunting coos deer, even if you're shooting 60 yards, I'm going to tell you to shoot mechanicals because coos deer are tiny, tiny animals. I think I've owned dogs bigger than some coos deer. So, if you're that guy, on the flip side, let's talk about hogs. Hogs are insanely tough animals, but they're not overly big. I would shoot a fixed bladed hog no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So, everything is situational.
Yeah. What about for the light arrow guys, like sub 450? Are you ever going to recommend a mechanical for something that light?
No, I would never recommend a mechanical for sub 450. And I built some arrows for guys that are right at the 400 range, and I can't obviously force anybody to shoot anything, but those guys, if you want to pass through, but you still want that flat trajectory, I think you need to go or a fixed blade. I don't think a mechanical is going to do what you need to do. I've always kind of been a heavy arrow guy, even inadvertently, right? For the longest time, I just built arrows I thought looked cool. I remember I built Carbon Express pile drivers. This has been years and years and years ago. They were an all camo shaft, so I put orange fletchings on them. I thought it looked really cool. I didn't know I was shooting a 550 grain arrow. They just looked cool. Mm-hmm. So I've kind of always inadvertently been a heavier arrow guy, and I always recommend people hit at least 450 grains, but some people have done lighter, and I don't get to force anybody to do anything. I can just make suggestions. So yeah, sub 450 for the average guy. I'm telling you, fixed blade. Again, your kind of options are endless. I do know that when you start getting 300 feet a second or faster or right in that area, there are certain broadheads that do tend to be more forgiving than other broadheads. So speed is a factor in selection as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never really had I've always struggled to make an arrow light enough for myself because I have a 30-inch draw. Yeah, and I shoot 70 pounds, so I'm obviously shooting to have a lower spine, and so I shoot 250 spine arrows, and they're 29.5 inches, and it's a lot of arrow right there. It's hard to get that
Yeah.
under 500 for me. And so I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm shooting a light arrow this year. It's 525. It's like the lightest I've been able to get it.
Yeah, and that's a struggle, I mean, so guys like you, if you came to me and said you wanted a light arrow, I'd probably look at something like a Black Eagle X Impact. I think a 250 spine Black Eagle is like 9.3 grains an inch.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then I'd tell you to go with the focus system up front, and that's 80 grains. So, I mean, you're kind of, you're a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of guy. And the advantage for guys like you, though, is because of your draw length and your specs and stuff like that, there's not really a broadhead out there I'd tell you couldn't shoot.
That's interesting.
So you've got that long draw length. It's all about energy, right? And we don't have enough time to debate kinetic energy versus momentum because that's like 4 podcasts. But it's all about energy, period. And you're a guy that's got that long draw length, and you've got 70 pounds going for you, and you've got a relatively heavy arrow. You should be able to push even a big 2-inch cut mechanical through anything whitetail size or smaller that you would ever want to.
Yeah,
Whitetail toughness.
Yeah, I've seen it I've stuck swacker broadheads in the dirt behind deer at 20 yards, and I've got complete pass throughs with fixed blades at 40. I mean, it's just, and another thing to consider for people that are listening that are fairly new is no 2 shots are the same. No 2 angles are the same. No 2 impacts are the same. The broadhead rotation, how it hits, whether vertical or horizontal. I don't think if you shot a deer 100 times, you'd ever get one that was perfectly the same. So
even
that's
if you shot him in the same exact spot.
Exactly. Yeah. So people say that all the time. Well, this broadhead would have done that. We don't know. We don't know that.
Yeah. So one thing I've picked up from Ranch Fairy, Troy, is that blood trails are variable, and he's spot on. And so I get a lot of questions like, what's the best blood trail broadhead? Like, what broadhead produces the best? There isn't one because it's so variable. I can shoot a deer with a tri-pan and have looks like somebody dumped a paint bucket out, and I can shoot another deer in the same exact spot, and it looks like I never even shot the deer. Blood trails are too variable, and you should never be selecting your broadhead based on blood trails they give, because I can show you videos of a 2-blade 1 1/8 inch cut broadhead that looks like you murdered somebody, and I can show you videos of Grim Reaper whitetail specials where I followed 2 pen drops to the deer. Both those deer were dead in 40 yards, but you're talking a vast difference in cut diameter, and the blood trails were what you would think would be polar opposite of one another.
Well, I shoot the NAP Thunderhead for the last couple of years, and I personally think it's some of the worst blood trails I've ever had on the broadhead itself. But what I know is with good shot selection, when I double lung a deer, I don't care if it goes 100 yards. If it goes under 100 yards, I'm finding it. I don't care on the blood trail or whatever's happened. I'll go get a dog. I'll worry about that later. My number one priority is like lethality and shot selection and making a really good shot. And after that point, I know the animal is going to expire. I'm going to find the animal. That's not I think people think about it as my broadhead is my insurance policy. I make a bad shot, I'll get a good blood trail even with a bad shot. And that's probably not the right way to think about it.
That's the complete wrong way to think about it. I have a very good friend that shoots kudu contours, and they're awesome broadheads, but even in my experience with those, they don't leave a good blood trail. He's had a couple where they leave great and some where they don't, but everything both of us have shot, and cumulatively between the two of us, there's like 8 deer dead. Nothing has ran more than 45 yards. Well, if they're dying in 45 yards, who cares if there's a blood trail?
Yeah.
If you're watching them die, like, it doesn't matter. And I think you're right. I think people look at a blood trail as like a crutch. And I guess my response to that is, if you're shooting deer right, you shouldn't necessarily need a blood trail.
Mm-hmm.
That's just been my experience.
Yeah, and honestly, in 2023, with how widely available and how awesome tracking dogs are, I'm like, listen, if I make a lethal shot, I'm finding that deer. I don't care. Mm-hmm. I'm finding it now. 5 years ago, I'm hunting public land, and native grass is 7 foot tall. Yeah, I start making, I don't have a good blood trail. It starts to make me worry. And if I'm going to recover that deer, 5 years later, it's not really that sort of conversation anymore.
Well, and then not only that, thermals are now legal in most states for blood tracking, and they're awesome. There's also little tricks you can do. Like, you can take a bottle of diluted hydrogen peroxide in a spray bottle and spray it and look for the bubbles. And I've found pin drops of blood I would never see with my naked eye doing that. I recommend that to guys that have color blindness issues. They can't differentiate blood on a leaf, but when you spray it, it's hard to miss those bubbles. So, I mean, there's so many little tricks you can do on top of the dog thing, which is like the ultimate. Nothing can beat a dog's nose when it comes to tracking a deer. Nothing.
Yeah,
so
100%.
It's one of those things where you said it. It's like you're going to find that deer as long as you did your job. What's interesting, though, is like, as much as I say blood trails are variable, there are certain situations where I'm more comfortable shooting a mech versus a fixed blade. So like 7-foot tall grass, as long as I have a clear shooting lane, I would prefer a mechanical, right? Because even though blood trails are variable, a larger cut by nature is going to spill more blood as long as I do my end. So I mentioned way earlier that I take like fixed blades and mechanicals. I take a whole quiver full of different broadheads. I shoot them situationally in different places. So I hunt public. Some of my public is really nasty and thick. Some of my public is like field edge. If I'm hunting thick, nasty stuff and I can't cut lanes, which I can't here, I'm shooting a fixed blade, because then if it happens to hit a stick, I feel like I have a little bit better chance of it doing what it needs to do once it gets to the animal or getting to the animal. Or if I'm on the ground and have to shoot through a little bit of grass, I feel like I have a better chance of getting to the animal with a fixed blade. If I'm shooting a field edge, if I'm sitting a field edge, I'll shoot a mechanical all day long. I don't have to worry about it hitting anything, deflecting, blades opening. Why not? I don't see a reason not to. But there's a confidence in my ability to make good shots and knowing what my ability is and not making bad shots because I'm overestimating my ability.
How big of a role do you think that plays in people in archery? Like just having confidence in what you're shooting when you pull that arrow out of the quiver, knowing I think I've got the right setup for the application.
Massively. I think the number one thing people underestimate is confidence in your equipment. And I think it's the most important thing when it comes to being lethal in the woods. Like, I don't think anything else matters more, because if you walk in those woods or, out in the mountains, wherever you're hunting, and you don't have confidence that in what you're killing or what you're doing is going to kill what you're hunting, you're wasting your time.
I've went in the woods before with cheap Chinese broadheads, a miscellaneous quiver with 5 different spines, 5 different arrow lengths. And I'm like, well, I got one good arrow. And after that, I'm throwing up prayers.
Yeah.
It's not a good feeling.
I mean, we've all been there, dude. That's how I started, right? I started with a $150 Walmart bow, hand-me-down aluminum arrows from a guy my dad worked with, and like broadheads from my grandpa and this guy that he worked with. And I mean, most of those aluminum arrows, I'm picking them up and rotating them to see if they're straight. And if they're not, I'm like, okay, that's a practice arrow. That's a practice arrow. Like, I wouldn't even dream of going in the woods with arrows that I've not shot now. But back then, it was like 7 different spine. And, I had one of those giant old quivers that held 7 arrows, and it was like 7 different spine aluminum arrows with 7 different broadheads. Some of them were bent, some weren't. And it was like you said, I have one good arrow. And if this arrow doesn't do it, I think everybody kind of starts there, or at least did, until there's such a wide array of available information. But I don't, it's definitely not the right way to go about it.
No. And so what would you, if you had to, in 30 seconds, tell somebody, a beginner, everything they need to know about broadheads, and maybe talk about there's not a one size fits all formula, how would you kind of wrap that up if you only had a few seconds to say that?
If I had to say it all in one shot, I think you don't need to spend a bunch of money on a broadhead, but don't spend very little. $40 a 3-pack is about average. Pick a broadhead you like and go with it. Thinking about it too much is going to just hurt you in the long run. That's really where I would start them. Like, if I've only got 30 seconds, you can only tell them one thing. That would be it. Because ultimately, even though a mechanical may not be perfect for that person's setup, if they put it behind the ribs and do what they need to do, it's probably going to do the job. Like, there's a 95% chance it's going to do what it's supposed to. So it'd just be, pick out a set of broadheads you like, screw them on, make sure they shoot right, and go have fun. I think we need to have fun first and then worry about the equipment later.
That's exactly what I was going to add to that. I was going to say, pick something and only change something based on maybe a negative experience if it's not working for you, and pick something and have fun. The equipment selection, the being a gear guy, I try to automate all that stuff before I actually get in the woods because it allows me to have more fun. When I'm like, okay, I got good
Right.
stuff, I got stuff that works, I know my equipment's in check. Now I get to go have fun. And that's kind of how I think about it. I think about, let's have it all done before we get to the woods so we can have a good experience, not the other way around.
Yeah, 100%. And I get so many people that are like, well, what broadhead should I shoot this year? What did you shoot last year? Well, I shot Q80 Exodus, which, by the way, is one of my favorite broadheads ever. Do you have a bad experience? No. Well, why are you changing? And I get it because I'm the guy shooting 6 different broadheads, but like, you don't really need to change anything unless you have a bad experience. And if you have a bad experience, let's talk about why and what it was. And you'll find a lot of times that it wasn't the broadhead's fault. Like 99% of the time, it's not the broadhead's fault.
I know. There's been very little instances where I've got pictures of, unless a broadhead broke or something like that, and people will shoot one in the shoulder and like, man, I didn't get great penetration. I'm like, okay, well, what were you expecting? That do you expecting just blow through both of them with that mechanical broadhead? Like, yeah, I thought so. Okay, fine.
Yeah. So that's the other thing about broadhead selection. I think a lot of people don't think about, right? As we hunt and as we gain more experience, we tend to shoot like farther forward on an animal or further back on an animal, particularly deer. And I think your selection needs to be based on where you tend to shoot. So I tend to hug a shoulder on a deer a lot closer than most guys. Because of that, I tend to prefer fixed blade broadheads because I have more confidence that if I nick the shoulder, they're going to do what they need to do. On the flip side, one of my very good friends tends to shoot back, so he shoots the biggest cut mechanical he can get his hands on, particularly Rage in his example. I think that matters. Like, you need to take that into account. Once you shoot enough animals, you'll kind of realize what kind of like hunter you are. And if you really like to hug tight to the shoulder, go fixed blade. If you like to shoot a little further back because it makes you feel more comfortable, go mechanical.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think we're all different in our habits, and you can actually mend your gear based on your own personality and how you hunt. I've never really considered that. That's a good point.
Yeah, well, and that's another question. So for an more experienced hunter or huntress or whoever that asks me, like, do you tend to shoot deer towards the shoulder or a little further back? And I've gotten about 50-50 as far as like responses go, which surprises me because a lot of everything is, tied up to that shoulder. But some people, and a lot of it is they had a bad experience where they shot a deer in the shoulder, got no penetration. So now they're scared of that shoulder and they want to shoot further back. Well, you're going to do better off with a bigger broadhead if you're going to shoot at the rear of the lungs because it's going to give you a better opportunity to get the rear of those lungs.
Mm-hmm.
Mechanical. But if you shoot tight to the shoulder with no fear, fixed blade. That's one of those little things that just kind of helps drive home. Like if somebody comes to me and says, what should I shoot for a broadhead? Well, that's one more thing to think about.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's talk about arrows for just a little bit here.
Sure.
What do you recommend, or what's your decision-making process when it comes to arrows? I mean, this is one that there's so much information about there, and there seems to be 2 camps. One, light to moderate, and heavy, and if you don't, you're not ethical. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so I've gotten some major flack, especially here recently. I build arrows based on just because I feel like shooting that arrow. So for me personally, and this is a personal thing, I'm shooting Black Eagle X impacts this year with an 80 grain focus system up front, and it was just because I wanted to see if I liked those arrows. They come out to 520 something grains. I don't particularly care about grain weight or FOC or any of that stuff for myself anymore because I've realized from shooting a bunch of different arrows that as long as I do my job, it all performs the same way, right? But for somebody to come to me like you just did and say, hey, what should I do for arrows or what do you think works the best? I always say 450 to 500 unless you feel the necessity to go heavier. And if you want to go heavier, why? I will build anybody whatever they want. I build a ton of custom arrows every year. I have no problem building what you want. But if you're going to ask me for opinions, let's really dig into why you think you need it. If you're going to tell me you need a 650 grain arrow because you watch somebody on YouTube say you need a 650 grain arrow, I'm going to tell you 10 reasons why you don't need it. If you're going to tell me you need a 300 grain arrow because faster is better, I'm going to tell you 10 reasons why it's not, why you don't need that arrow. But if you're going to tell me you want a 650 grain arrow because, you like to shoot close to the shoulder and you want to make sure you can get through it and your shots are 20 yards max, all right, let's build it up. But for the average person walking up to me with the average draw length, draw weight, let's build you something 450 to 500 and call it a day. Whatever brand you want, there's not a company out there that's a major company that makes a bad arrow anymore. Like, those days are gone for everything equipment. There's no bad bow companies that are major companies, arrow companies, broadheads, fletchings. Like, nothing is bad anymore. It just doesn't exist. Technology has reached the point where it's accessible for everyone. Everybody can make great stuff. So, if you like Black Eagle, cool, we can do that. Victory, Easton, whatever. But I usually shoot that 450, 500 grain range for the average person walking off the street that just wants to shoot a good arrow.
So you're pointing people in a moderate direction, unless there's an extreme outlier case of, hey, I'm hunting out west, I want to shoot 98 yards on a mule deer, I need something light, or hey, I'm shooting my max is 12 yards at a 400-pound whitetail in Canada.
Yeah, exactly. If you're a guy if you're out west hunter, I might tell you, hey, let's err on the lighter end side of that, maybe even like 425 grains, because I want to preserve some of your trajectory, especially if you're starting to get into guys that are like 60 pounds or like a 25-inch draw length. Like, I want to preserve some trajectory for you, because there's times out there you're shooting gaps between pine tree boughs, and then you're shooting, maybe you range the elk for 40 yards, but those are big animals. They take 5 steps and they're 55 yards. Now we want a little bit better trajectory. So when you're guessing that yardage, you have a higher chance of lethality. On the flip side, you're shooting 400-pound whitetail in Saskatchewan, or you're shooting 400-pound hogs down in Texas. Particularly like the feeder guys that are hunting over feeders or bait sites, no matter where it be. Like, if you're 20-yard max guy, let's crank it up. I mean, if you want to shoot tight to the shoulder, let's do that. Let's do the heavy arrow high FOC method then. I mean, there's no reason not to, but I think the heavy arrow high FOC falls short out west, just like I think the lighter arrows, not that they fall short necessarily in a feeder situation. I just don't think they're necessary. So again, it's like the broadheads, situational. But for the average guy that's in the whitetail woods shooting 40 yards, I think that 450 to 500 grain range is like right on the money.
Yeah, it sounds very important to, if you want something extreme, knowing why. Not just, hey, my favorite hunting influencer that hunts nothing like where I hunt told me to, and this is what I'm going to get now.
Yeah, and I see a lot of that, because again, there's just so much information out there, and it's so easy for a new guy to go down a YouTube rabbit hole and then decide that he needs a 900 grain arrow. It's so easy for that same guy to go down a rabbit hole and decide he needs a 350 grain arrow.
Yeah.
The reason I ask questions like that when people come to me for advice is because I want to educate. Like, I don't have a problem. Like I said, I don't have a problem building you that 650 grain arrow, but my ultimate goal is to make you as lethal as possible in the woods. And if I think that arrow is going to hinder your lethality, I'm going to try to steer you away from it. It just makes more sense. I think you're going to have a better overall experience. And that's ultimately my goal, is to make sure everyone has the best experience they possibly can when they go in the woods. I equate it to like a numbers game. We'll say, just off the top of my head, I think the average like success rate with a bow is 10%, right? So they say 10% of bow. They say the saying is 10% of bow hunters kill 90% of animals. So we'll say it's just 10%. Like, I know for elk out west, for sure it's 10%. So if your likelihood is 10%, so that means 1 out of every 10 years you get a chance. Why would we not want to do everything we can to statistically maximize that opportunity? That's the way I look at it. That means making sure your bow's tuned. That means let's get you a good broadhead and arrow build for your situation, and let's rock it.
Yeah, I heard a really good quote the other day at church, and I mentioned it on a couple of different podcasts so far, but I heard a quote that goes, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think if you're one of those guys that loves to half-ass it, I don't know why you would do anything at all. Like, that's just the way that I think about it. If you're going to, I don't want to put in that. Okay, that's fine, but don't be surprised. That's fine as long as you're not surprised on the back end when you're unsuccessful and something doesn't work out.
Yeah. So along those lines, one of my favorite personal quotes is just, I either no ass it or whole ass it. There's no half assing. Like I'm that guy. So my response to those guys that want to half ass it is take it to a guy like me that'll whole ass it and let him do it for you.
Yeah.
Because then on the back end of that, ultimately now I know you're in the woods at least being as lethal as you possibly can. Right. So I feel like I've done my due diligence to make sure you're not out just wounding animals.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's, if I can't convince you to put in the time, at least let me put in the time for you for the animal's sake. And that's ultimately where it lies for me, right? I want you to have a good time in the woods, but if you're not going to put in the work to have that time, and it does take work to have a good time in the woods, then now it's all about the animals. And I just want you to not hurt as many as possible.
Yeah, that's a good point. It sounds like from an arrow perspective, I think people think of arrows, they think of, it's just an arrow, that's what it is. But I think of it a little differently. And I think how you explained it is there's different use cases. You don't use a tablet for the same reason you use a laptop, for the same reason you use a desktop. They're all different. And just like you're saying, there's 29 North American big game animals, and there's probably a lot of overlap in different arrows for each one of those, but if you broke them up into small, big, large, and then distances, I think you could really hone in on kind of what somebody needs for their exact setup. And I think that's kind of what you're doing, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly what I'm doing. If you were to tell me, hey, I'm going up to the Yukon and I'm going to hunt a moose,
maybe we should get up into the like 550 grain range, because generally speaking, bow shots on moose
are relatively close, right? But they're giant animals.
So let's get a little heavier arrow. Let's put a fixed blade up front and we'll call it a day. On the flip side, if you're going down to Arizona and shooting coos deer, a lot of those shots are 50, 60, even longer ranges, and it's on a small animal. So let's do something that's got a little bit better trajectory, maybe put a mechanical up front. Mm-hmm. If you're a small frame shooter and you're shooting 40 pounds at 22 inches or 25 inches or whatever draw length, I'm not going to build you a 600 grain arrow, because now you have a 10-yard pin and you have a 15-yard pin, and maybe we can get a 20-yard pin in there. I'm going to build you an arrow that makes sense for you, which may be 300 grains, but we're for sure going to put a fixed blade up front, and it's for sure going to be a cut on contact fixed blade. On the flip side, if you're a 30-inch draw and you're shooting 70 pounds and you're shooting a 500 plus grain arrow, because it's hard to get lower than that, I don't know, let's throw a whatever you want up front. Let's throw a Grim Reaper whitetail special on front if you're shooting 40 or closer whitetail.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to smoke them. Or a fixed blade or whatever you want. Like I said, guys like you, I kind of envy, because there's even some broadheads in situations I won't shoot a mechanical, period, past 40 yards at an animal. I just won't do it. Not at a whitetail. Mm-hmm. But somebody like you that's got your kind of specs, especially if you're shooting like a modern high-end compound bow, I'd feel comfortable stretching that out to 60, because I feel like with the energy you'd push out of that bow, you're going to get at least a pass through, maybe not the arrow on the other side, but you're going to get 2 holes. I don't have that same confidence in me 28 inches at 70 pounds.
Yeah.
But then you take a fixed blade and we're on an even playing field again.
That's right. Yeah. I shot my bow through a chrono, I think it was last year, and with my arrows, and I got 262 out of it. And I got so sad for a second. I was like, oh my gosh, my bow's so slow. I was like, this sucks. And I went and I shot I think I shot 6 deer last year, and I got 5 pass throughs through the dirt. And I was like, this isn't bad. The speed doesn't matter. I'm not building an animal to get Ranch Fairy always says you're not building an animal to get, or an arrow to get to the animal. You're building one to get through. And seeing is believing with an arrow. I think people just got to get something that is, like you said, is moderate, get a good broadhead on there, something they have confidence in, and go see.
Yeah, and I mean, spot on. And Ranch Fairy is spot on with that saying too. I know Troy, not super well, but I've met him a handful of times. He's an insanely nice guy. And at the end of the day, all he really wants to do is help. And he says a lot of stuff that I totally agree with. Like, you're building an arrow to get through an animal. Mm-hmm. That's my goal always, is 2 holes. Always. But I also, 3 inches in the dirt is the same as 3 foot in the dirt. Like, I don't have to go extreme. That's kind of where him and I start to differ a little bit.
But yeah, it's just this. There's this wild thing that's like, I don't know. Back to the polarizing thing, it just kind of baffled me because at the end of the day, we're all hunters, right? Like we need to be on the same side, but it seems like we can't step aside from that to just get along.
I agree. And there's not enough of us out there to not get along. So people need to
Yeah,
get along. And I don't know, I show some people a deer that I kill, and I go, "What kind of bow did you shoot that with? What arrows? What broadheads?" It's like, hey, I'm showing you a dead animal here. This is pretty sweet. It doesn't really
yeah,
matter.
right. Well, I'm a gear nerd, so I would totally ask those questions, but not for the same reasons as what you're talking about. Because
Yeah.
yeah, the next favorite question is, well, how far was it? How far did it run? How much blood was there?
Hmm.
Going back to like broadhead thing again. Well, you'd have more blood if you shot this broadhead instead.
Have you tried these? You got to try. These are way better. It's like, okay, man.
The fortunate experience I have is I can usually say yes, I've tried those.
Yeah, that's nice.
Playing with so many of them, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I have not shot an animal with all these broadheads. Like that would be insane. I don't think I have enough time nor money to go do that with all these broadheads, right? But if I can't shoot an animal with it, I usually send them to somebody who will, and it's somebody that I trust and knows their equipment and has been doing it long enough to understand, like, if it's a broadhead problem, if it's a them problem, and it's somebody that'll give me the whole rundown. So they're people I trust with information, so that when they relay it to me, I can relay it to somebody else and know that it's not BS.
Mhm.
So like I try to do as much due diligence as I possibly can. It's a blast, but it's also a little taxing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's for sure. Well,
So
I appreciate you coming on and talking about this polarizing topic. Broadheads, arrows. Were you going to say something else, by the way? Did I cut you off?
I was just going to say, don't feel too bad about your speed. This is the first year and probably the last 8 that I've shot a bow over 270 feet a second.
Oh, nice. Hey, we're in the same boat then. Not too bad.
Yeah, dude. Speed is not a thing that matters. Accuracy is, and I can drop dimes. That's all that matters.
That's right. That's right. Well, Trent, I really appreciate you coming on. I've seen you on TikTok for probably a few years now, so it's really good to connect with you. I'd love to connect with you in person sometime. But for folks that want to follow along with what you're doing, maybe get a set of custom arrows from you, maybe get a bow from you, something cool, where can they do all that and connect with you?
So you can find me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. It's Chest Thumper Outdoors on all of those platforms. You can email me at chestthumperoutdoors@gmail.com. You can text me at 217-378-0092. And one thing I really want to drive home is if you have questions, I'm more than happy to take the time to talk to you. You never have to spend a single penny with me ever to ask me a question. Again, my ultimate goal is that everybody be as successful as possible in the woods. That doesn't mean you have to spend any money with me at all. If you just want to, chew the fat, you just want to talk my ear off. Heck, if you just want to send me a picture of a doe you killed last Saturday because it was a cool doe that you killed last Saturday, like, sweet, I'm stoked on that. I live, eat, breathe, sleep archery and bow hunting, so you're just going to make my day. So by all means, don't ever be afraid to reach out.
That's awesome. Well, you guys go check Trent's stuff out. And like I said, man, I really appreciate it. Thank you for jumping on. We'll do this again sometime.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah, dude, I'd love to. Let's find some more polarizing fun topics.
Oh, yeah. Thank you guys so much for checking out the Hunter's Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.